Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to share with you some mastering tips and tricks, but if you're looking for a video for how to master your own music from start to finish, I do have a few videos on my channel using either free plugins or some of my favorites, so I've left links to those in the description, but for now I'm just going to share with you some of my favorite mastering tips and tricks. So let's start with one I'm really passionate about, which is macrodynamics while mastering. With music production, there's microdynamics and macrodynamics. Microdynamics is changes in volume over a very short period of time. So that might be, perfecting the compression on a snare or making sure that the level of a vocal is consistent from one word to the next. But macrodynamics, when mastering, refers to the changes in volume between parts of a song, say the verse, the chorus, the bridge. And the reason I'm really passionate about this is because I think it can add a ton of impact to a master. A simple way to take advantage of macrodynamics during your mastering process is to automate the gain going into your limiter. So in this setup, I have a utility plugin to add a little bit more gain, and I have my limiter here. Then in the chorus, my automation clip just adds 1 dB of gain going into the limiter, and then in the next verse, I pull it back down. If you use this technique right, it should sound like you're adding a little bit of weight and a little bit of tone to the chorus. It might feel a little bit louder, but it's not just going to sound like you've turned the volume up like some gimmicky trick like that. It should just be more of something you subtly perceive through the master. Now it's important to increase the gain before the limiter and not afterwards, because the limiter is going to be making sure that our true peaks and our ceiling is where we want it to be. So we don't want to be automating the gain after the limiter, because that could lead to some big problems with distribution. This next one is sure to cause some upset, but it's try not to use compression when mastering unless you really know what you're doing and you can really hear the difference. But bear with me because I'll explain why I'm saying something so outrageous. It's that often in a lot of genres in the past, you needed mix bus compression, mastering compression to glue everything together. You had a ton of live recorded, very transient material that really needed glued together. But in a lot of modern genres, where we're using heavily compressed samples and drum loops, compressed synthesizers, super heavy compressed vocals, sometimes just adding extra compression during the mastering stage is just simply removing dynamics that actually usually sound great. So sometimes it can be better to have the only compression in your mastering chain come from that limiter at the very end. However, I do want to say that mix bus and mastering compression does often sound great if you know what you're doing, but I found with a lot of people I've been mentoring for mixing and mastering, the problem is they've got a super expensive, fancy mix bus compressor, which can sound great, but they just haven't taken the time to really improve their listening skills, make sure that their listening environment lets them hear these changes in dynamics. So what they end up doing is just slapping this $200 plugin on their master, hoping that it will impart some magic, and just sort of keeping the fingers crossed, hoping for the best, when really I'd say it's better to just take that off until you really know what it's doing. So experiment with it, push it to its limits and try to listen to it, improve your critical listening skills, and then one day you will be at a stage where you can really hear the difference that compression makes, and it'll be making a good difference to your master instead of just a random change. And this takes me straight on to the next tip, which is to just keep things simple. So when mastering, the first thing I would recommend doing is simply putting a limiter on your mix and getting it up to a good loudness. Now, if you don't know how to do this, check out the video I've linked in the description, but use a meter like the Uline loudness meter. First, just use a simple limiter to get the loudness up. Save that master, put it to one side, and then try all of your creative experimental mastering. Export that one at a good loudness as well, and then compare both of those side by side, the simple one and the complicated one, and then really be truthful with yourself, because no one else is listening. Do you like the new one just because it's different, or do you like it because you really feel you've added a lot to it and taken away stuff that wasn't there? And this is something that I have had a problem with for years, is sometimes when I make a change, I think it sounds better simply because it's different and I've been used to the other one for a while. Sometimes when you've put in so much work throughout the mix, you've added all the tone and texture that you need, often mastering is just a simple process of making sure that there's no mistakes, no clicks and pops, or any vocal sibilants cutting through the mix. Sometimes you don't need to add a ton of plugins, but sometimes you do. So just try to be truthful with yourself, and remember that if you're bypassing a plugin, if you're turning something on and off, and you really can't hear the difference, it's probably best not using that plugin for now and just working on your listening skills until you can really hear what something's doing. Don't rely on sort of like some magic or just crossing your fingers and hoping. Definitely do your mastering creatively, but also do it with a purpose. And this again takes me on to my next tip, which is all about referencing. So you probably know to reference other songs that you love when you're mixing, producing, and mastering. There's a very specific way I like to reference, and it's not to try and copy a whole song, because I find this is pretty boring, and I don't ever want my masters to sound like anyone else's. I want my artists to sound, like themselves. So what I ask for is lots of different references for how you'd like just the low end to sound, or just the high end, just the mid-range. So what they'll end up saying is, I'd love the kick and the bass to sound like something like these two songs, but I'd love the top end to sound like this other song. And this means that you're just using these great songs for small parts of your referencing, trying to really get the low end to sit the way they like it in that song. But it means that you're not just copying some other artist, you're not just, doing some cookie cutter copy of something that someone else has done, because that's pretty boring. What I like to do is to just reference parts of a song, not the whole song. It's as simple as that. This final tip is really 2-in-1, and it's all about EQ when mastering. So you've probably heard that it's good to use wide boosts and cuts and not boost or cut too much during mastering, which is great advice, and it's something that I will echo here. Seriously, if you are having to boost more than about 1 dB, it's probably something you should go back to the mix to change. However, I know that a lot of people, if you take a wide band and you just boost by 1 dB or cut by 1 dB, a lot of people can't hear the difference, and honestly, I really couldn't when I started as well. And it's a combination of a few things. One is your listening environment, so your speakers and headphones might not be giving you the detail you need to hear those changes, in which case it's probably best to not make those changes and maybe let someone else help you with the mastering if they have some better equipment. But the other part is just the ear training. It takes many months and many years to develop a very critical ear to be able to hear very small differences. So sometimes even 1 dB is too much. 0.2, 0.3 dB on the top end can be all you need in mastering, because when you're adding half a dB of gain, it's like you're adding that to all of the tracks summed up. So these differences, these small differences during mastering, can impart a really big difference overall. However, the second part of this tip goes entirely against that, and this is going to cause some upset again, and that is to use a really big notch or bell filter and try cutting out vast portions of the mix. Take 10, 20, 30 dB away from a certain range of frequencies. Use this to sweep through to try and find problems. So do not set this and export your mix through this, it will completely ruin it. But what I see when people try to find problems with their master is that they take a little notch up and they sweep it around. And I have another video all about EQ, explaining why I don't like this boost and sweep method most of the time. I prefer to cut away a band of frequencies and then listen through. And what you're listening for is, can you find a range of frequencies where you take them away and you honestly just think, you know what, actually this mix just got a lot more clear. Or, wow, the bass is hitting a lot more clean now in this mix. Or, actually, the hi-hats sound a lot better, they're not as sharp, for instance. The question you're asking yourself is, what can I take away from this master without removing any of the good stuff? And if that's the case, if you can find a frequency, say you get to 300 Hertz, and you can take away a ton and you actually think things sound better, at that point, take that cut away, but go back to the mix and see what is happening at 300 Hertz that's causing a problem. It might be a resonance on a piano or a guitar. It might be some of the low mid of a vocal is all congested, for instance. So once you've dealt with that in the mix, then go back to your mastering and you might find that things are much cleaner. However, I'm not suggesting to take a big cut of 30 dB and export your song through that. This is more of a listening exercise to try and find a problem. I just want to clarify that. I really don't want people making huge EQ cuts and boosts and exporting through that, because that will probably ruin your master. So that's it for today, but I wanted to say I made this video because I asked on my community tab in a poll what sort of videos people would like to see, and I'm really thankful for everyone that voted, but also all the comments asking for very specific types of videos. It's incredibly helpful for me because I know what videos I want to make, but I also like to know what you want to see, and that way we sort of meet in the middle. I make stuff that I'm really happy with, but I feel like I'm helping you guys out a lot more. So please, in the comments down below, share your mastering tips, but also let me know what you want to see in the future, because I really want to make this channel as helpful as possible for you. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye for now.